soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God.
Well, it is well Now, good morning, everybody. Morning. Welcome to our Sunday morning Bible class this morning. We're continuing our study on the book of Romans. And so the continuing saga of the book of Romans. The book of Romans is an epistle, a letter, but it's a really long letter. It's about 20 to 25 pages if you were to write it out on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So it's a long letter. Most of us don't write long letters like that anymore. It's dealing with the recently reunited Jews and Gentiles in Rome. And those Jews and Gentiles are uncertain about their relationship with the Mosaic covenant and with the gospel, and how those two things interconnect, and what's the association of those things. And so there's some disagreement about it. We don't know how sharp that disagreement is. We can guess maybe, because people are people, but we don't really have a clear definition of how it was in Rome. We can maybe surmise from some of the other letters of Paul that it was pretty sharp. But we don't know that for sure, but we do know that they were wrestling with what's the connection of the Mosaic covenant and what's the relationship of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so Paul's introducing himself, but he's also providing that background so people understand that. So, as I said, Paul's introducing himself. He's letting them know that he has the authority from God to preach the gospel, but he also wants them to understand what his gospel position is. So they recognize what the gospel is that he's going to share with them. Paul wishes to build relationships with the church in Rome and to help them to be united. So these are just some review things that we've talked about over the last few weeks. And of course, his main message is the gospel message is for everyone. And of course, we can grab that. Excuse me. We can grab that concept for us, right? The gospel message is for everyone. More for the review. There is no reason to be ashamed of the gospel. A whole week on, not a whole week on, but a whole class on. So I guess that is a week. There's no reason to be ashamed of the gospel of God. And then we began to understand last week that God is angry. God's wrath is real. Mankind tends to focus not on God, but on God's creation rather than Him. Or, as we mentioned before, worse than just God's creation, we tend to focus on our creations. So the creations of the created are the things that we focus on. And this leads to all kinds of self-centeredness, including self-righteous judging. And we tied the Romans chapter 2 and Romans chapter 1, and you saw the list of sins in Romans chapter 1, and we go, aha, aha, aha. And then we jump into chapter 2, and he immediately switches to judging, and you're thinking, why the switch? And then he kind of twists the knife a little bit and says, that's the same thing. You're still focused on yourself. You're not focused on God when you're judging other people. And so, basically, the whole concept of self-centeredness and focusing on ourselves leads to chaos. I was listening to a little podcast the other day on public speaking, and this guy was talking about, he says, most people are nervous about public speaking. He says, why are they nervous about public speaking? He says, because they're thinking about themselves. He says, don't think about yourself. He says, the problem is that what you're looking at is a whole bunch of people out there. You know what they're thinking about? Lunch. They're not thinking about you, the mistakes you make. They're thinking about other stuff. All right? And so that was his motivational speech. But point is, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. We are self-centered. We are self-focused. And, recognizing that helps us to change that focus and look to the Creator, the one who created us. Okay, so we never want to forget, week after week, I'll present this chart because we are diving into Romans and looking at individual sections of it. What is the main message of Romans? The main message of Romans, all are lost without Christ. We're saved by God's grace. Our grace is accessed through faith in God and through his plan in Jesus Christ, and active faith changes people. Okay, so that's the message of Romans, front to back, but he talks about a lot of stuff in between. I mean, he wrote 25 pages, so it's got to be a lot there, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about the a lot there here this morning. So how's everyone doing this morning? Good? Good. Awesome. Awesome. Yes, sir.
You know, I got a friend that I work with him on the weekends, and he's an older guy, and we were discussing the importance of, having communion. And he says, well, along with having communion, we need to have foot washing. I said, and what's the purpose of the foot washing? Why would foot washing be as important as remembering Christ's blood, his body and his blood? And he says, well, it's personal service, one to the other. And I said, he said, but I can't get, these people in this other church I'm going to wash my feet. And I said, well, you can't wash your own feet? And he said, well, yeah, of course I can do that. And I said, the whole purpose of, the Lord's Supper is to remember Christ and his sacrifice. I said, we come together on Sunday morning. That's the primary thing we're doing. We're remembering Christ. We're worshiping God. Putting him first. And it's not about us. And I said, we are supposed to be serving God.
Right.
And remembering what we've been blessed with. Now, a lot of what you're talking about in this letter with Romans is, Paul's putting this together, trying to draw these two groups together to get them from being individuals to being one.
Right, correct.
But he wants them to serve one another, but but they're serving God first.
Yes.
And that's what I kept trying to stress to my friend. And but he has a way of mixing Old and New Testament, diving into stuff, and then
Yeah, so
struggling with it.
it's a challenge that all of us deal with. I'm not talking about dealing with communicating to others, but dealing with ourselves, is we tend to focus on the parts that we're familiar with, instead of opening it up and being contextual about what the Gospel's messages are saying. And so the individual that you're referring to, foot washing, I mean, I know that Tammy's had in a Bible class has had the kids wash each other's feet. So, I mean, certainly we can do that. I don't have any objection to it. Just a matter of who wants to start, right? And the problem is that Jesus started that, right? Yeah, he showed us that the one who wants to serve is the one.
What he was trying to stress was that the foot washing was just as important as
Service
Yeah.
is critical. Yeah. All right, let's refocus. All right, because we got a lot to cover in Romans. Romans chapter 2, beginning in verse 12, is where we're going to begin. For all who have sinned without the law will also perish without the law, and all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do not do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them on the day when, according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of men by Christ Jesus. Last week we pointed out that we are without standing before the eternal and all-powerful God. We have no position by which we can say there was no evidence that you are God. There is no evidence that there is a God. We're without standing. when we stand before a almighty, all-powerful, divine authority of God. We learn that if we stubbornly rebel against what we can clearly see, he will turn us over to what we seek. He'll turn us over to what we seek. That is, he'll turn us over to ourselves. We are at the mercy of ourselves. And we see that that generates, while on earth, chaos. We were beginning to see the wrath of God if we fail to focus our gratitude and worship on him. Romans chapter 2, verses 8 through 9 says, "But for those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, there will be wrath and fury. There will be tribulation and distress for every human being who does evil." The wrath and anger of God is not reserved, however, only for the Jews or only for the Gentiles. If you live rebelliously toward God without Jewish law, Paul says, or if you live rebelliously toward God with the Jewish law, you deal with God's wrath. Doesn't matter. With the law or without the law, you deal with God's wrath if you're rebellious toward God. Paul is setting up to show that it isn't the Jewish law or the Mosaic law that saves or makes you right with God, but rather your response to God. Okay? There are and have been many Jewish people by blood who have not honored God or his laws or his desires. Similarly, there are non-Jews, he says, who by their higher sense of morality have shown and are showing that the laws of God are written on their hearts. That's what Paul's saying. He says, you got to recognize there are people out there that recognize that there's a higher power and a higher God, and they're serving that. He says, you got to recognize that. It's written on their hearts. They know. Because they can see. They can see that must exist. Remember, we said, Paul is introducing himself to Roman Christians, and he wants to make sure that the Jewish and the Gentile Christians are united. So he's giving them a common foundation. Okay? And at the same time, while doing this, he's providing us a foundation, right? Okay. So, how would these words that we just read have hit the Jewish Christians? How would that have hit them? What? Not well? Well, wait a minute. He's trying to get some ground, gain some ground with them, but not well, right? Why? Oh, yeah. You are not special. No matter what anybody's told you, I love you all, but you're not special. I'm not special. We're just not. We're just not. And that's what he's telling the Jews. You're just not special. You think you are, but you're not special. It's not about you. Right? And that's tough for us to take because we want to believe that we're special. And we are, in a way. And we'll get to that. We're all loved by God. That's very special, right? But the point that he's trying to get to these Jews is just because you had a relationship with God through the Mosaic law does not make you special, right? And Paul is not holding back at this point. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of God. Paul's demonstrating that. Because he's telling some people who have some high and mighty thoughts about themselves, nope, Sorry. Nothing special about you. You think it is, but it's not. And I'm going to explain to you why it's not. He's going to get there too, right? All right. Ooh. But if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God and know His will and prove what is excellent because you are instructed from the law, and if you are sure that you yourselves are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor to the foolish, a teacher of children, having the law, in the law, the embodiment of knowledge and truth. You then, who teach others, I have a question for you. Do you teach yourselves? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You say that you must not commit adultery, but do you commit adultery? You who harbor idols, and do you rob temples? Abhor idols. Do you rob temples? You who boast in the law dishonor God by breaking the law, for it is written, in the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Many of the self-righteous Jews were relying on their connection to the law of Moses as if it were the law or the adherence of its traditions were where salvation was found. That wasn't even true in the Old Testament for those who were open-hearted enough to see it. But with their knowledge of the law, they felt that they could nitpick the less worthy Gentiles in their newfound walk with God through Jesus Christ. Hence, a guide to the blind, a light to the darkness, an instructor to the foolish, teacher of children. Paul wants them to now put up a mirror and look at themselves. Do you steal? Do you commit adultery? Wow. There are many possible explanations to the you who abhor idols, do you rob temples? I've chosen this one. I've looked and they're like, well, it might mean this, it might mean this, it might mean this. Here's the one I've chosen. You can go look for other meanings and other possibilities. One I've chosen is, do you have the zeal for God in your abhorrence of idols that you would rob their gods, for you know that the law demanded it? Exodus chapter 34, verse 13. You shall tear down their altars and break their pillars and cut down their Asherim. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 5. But thus you shall deal with them. You shall break down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars and chop down their Asherim and burn their carved images with fire. Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 3. You shall tear down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars and burn their Asherim with fire. You shall chop down the carved images of their gods and destroy the name out of this place. You see, to live in Roman society, you have chosen to make compromises to the law. So you can't stand before God and claiming to have followed the law because you haven't. Boasting about it dishonors God. You may be blind to these flaws in your logic, but trust me, the Gentiles are not blind to it. You are dishonoring God by breaking the law. Something here. What actions by Christians would be seen as dishonoring God among non-believers? I'm not talking about them, I'm talking about us.
Putting on external appearance of following Jesus, yet maybe so many of
Yeah.
The same exact thing.
That same self-centeredness
Okay.
that focus on ourselves instead of our brothers and sisters in Christ. Focus on ourselves versus the world.
Okay. So two things I heard. One, self-centeredness, and the second one is the same kinds of concepts of having this duplicity of life. A lack of humility. Lack of humility. Okay. So by the same token, we can fall into the exact same traps that Paul's talking about, and we can blaspheme the name of God before the Gentiles. Now, somewhere in here, it got out of order, so I'm not sure how to approach this, but do you remember where Jesus talked about blasphemy? It's the one we worry about all the time, right? Don't blaspheme the Holy Spirit. The name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Paul is making a very, very strong point. Don't be two-sided. If you believe in God, act on it. Be that person that you claim to be. All the way. Okay? That's hard. This is a hard lesson, by the way, just in case you didn't know it was coming. This is a hard lesson. Dishonoring God among the non-believers. How do we keep from doing that? How do we walk in such a way that people clearly see that we're following God? And so I'm going to skip that because I don't know what happened to my printout here. So we're going to move on. And then what actions can be seen as honoring God among the non-believers? Let's look at it the other way. Let's try to be positive. Yeah, when people know, we sing a song, right? And they'll know we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. Continuing on our reading. Then, now that he's laid this foundation for the Jews, and they're in this kind of funk, right? They're kind of like, I've just been beat up. He asked the natural question, then what advantage has the Jew? Or what's the value of circumcision, which of course was the covenant agreement with the Jews, right? Between God and the Jews. Much in every way. He says there's a lot of advantage to begin with. And while he says to begin with here, you might think he's going to have like 3 or 4 points. Fact of the matter is, he doesn't even get to the second point until chapter 9. So we're just going to cover the first point, okay? To begin with, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. What if some were unfaithful? Does their faithfulness or unfaithfulness nullify the faithfulness of God, or faithlessness? Does their faithlessness nullify the faith of God? By no means. Let God be true, though everyone a liar, as it is written, that you may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. So, Paul is saying, there is an advantage to being the Jew in the sense that you were the honored vessel to bring the message of God, the promises of God forward. Your job was to bring the messages of God forward. And you look at your history. How did you do? Well, you kind of dropped the ball here, you kind of dropped the ball here, you kind of dropped the ball here. But you know what? God still did exactly what he said he was going to do through you. What was the promise to Abraham? Through your seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed. So God was faithful through your unfaithfulness. That's a powerful message. Genesis chapter 17, verse 10. No longer shall your name be called Abraham, but your name shall be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and your offspring after you. And I will give you and to your offspring after you a land of your sojourning, of the land of Canaan, for an everlasting portion. And I will be their God. God said to Abraham, as for you, you shall keep my covenant, and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every man throughout your generation, whether born in your house or bought with money from any foreigner who is not your offspring. Both he who is born in your house and he is bought with your money shall surely be circumcised. So shall my covenant be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Now, so he talks about circumcision here. What advantage has the Jew, or what is the value of circumcision? You know, the thing about it is, they didn't keep that covenant either. Did you know that? They didn't keep that one either. Joshua chapter 5, verse 25. Joshua chapter 5, beginning in verse 2. And at that time the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel a second time. Though all the people who had come out had been circumcised, yet all the people who were born in the way of the wilderness, after they had come out of Egypt had not been. So it was their children who had raised up in their place, and Joshua had circumcised, for they were uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised along the way. So they knew about that one. So they hadn't kept the covenant. Closer to home for the Jews at that time, this is unusual for a Bible class, I'm going to bring up, was just 250 years prior to that. And that is found in the book of Maccabees, chapter 2, verse 46, where they went about within the borders of Israel performing circumcision because they had not been permitted to obey the law under persecution. So again, they hadn't kept that law. Paul points out that circumcision is the mark of the covenant between Abraham and God as well, right? So we know that Abraham's descendants and God made this covenant together. Paul said, a man can be circumcised without being a Jew, and a Jew should not merely be circumcised internally, externally, but internally. Circumcision of the heart is a matter of the heart. Paul has good grounds for saying this. In chapter 4, verse 4, it says, circumcise yourself to the Lord, remove the foreskins of your heart, O men of Judah, inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my wrath come forth like a fire. Okay, so we've covered that circumcision part of that story. I want to move on to the next part of Romans chapter 2, beginning in verse, I'm not sure where that is. Yeah, I think it's the beginning of chapter 3. He says, then what advantage has a Jew, or what value is circumcision? Much in every way. I said that. To begin with, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. What if some were unfaithful? We've read this actually. Does this faithfulness nullify their faithfulness in God? By no means. Let God be true, though everyone is a liar, as it is written. that you may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. Paul now asks the question. Paul says to begin with, I've covered that. Paul quotes from Psalms chapter 51 here, verse 4, where he says, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your word and blameless in your judgment." So who was speaking here? This is Psalms chapter 51. Who was? David. And what was the occasion of David speaking here? You remember? Yeah. He had been rebuked by Nathan for his killing of Uriah and also his infidelity with Uriah's wife, right? And so at this point, David says he's falling upon the mercy of God. David's calling on the mercy and love of God that God had promised, but fully acknowledging his guilt. Paul is weaving into the discussion about the purpose of being a Jew. God is supplying his love and his mercy as he promised, despite his guilt, despite our guilt. It says, God promised this. You've been unfaithful, but God's love and God's mercy is continuing. He's still got that. It's still fulfilling his promise. Again, he's coming back to the point. It's about God. It's about God. It may be for us, but it's not about us. The law may have been for the Jews, but it wasn't about the Jews. The promises may have been for the Jews, but it wasn't about the Jews. You know, that still applies to us. The promises may be for Christians, but it's not about Christians. Promises may be to you, it's not about you. Still all about God. The Jews had been entrusted with the oracles of God, and with the God's faithfulness, they were able to prevail. Okay. I think I see what happened in my notes. Somehow or another, I got two lessons together, and I had an extra page in there, and I apologize for that. I'm sitting there going, this is not making any sense. I went through this. Have you ever done that? You ever been there? No. See, we're entrusted too, right? What are we entrusted with? We're entrusted with the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're entrusted with the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God, the promises of God, and we are entrusted with the salvation of God. Right? Wow. That's our responsibility. What does God's faithfulness, despite our unfaithfulness, teach us about his character and how we approach and represent him? His promises are always true. His promises will occur. 100%, they will occur. Okay, good. Oh, awesome.
He always
his
loves us and sees the best in us.
Okay.
Always see the best in each other.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so God doesn't give up on us. God's steadfast love and mercy abounds forever, right? He doesn't give up on us. Awesome. And God doesn't, and that's a great part of the gospel message. God doesn't give up on you, right? It's also, as Melissa points out, it's a message for us. We who are trying to reflect God don't give up on each other. That's a little harder, isn't it? Okay? All right. Paul now presents some unstoppable, I'm not going to read this, I'm going to leave it up there for just a moment. Paul now presents some unstoppable ideas and then turns around unsupportable ideas, and then he turns around and beats them down. Right? You ever done that? You like throw this up, you're thinking this. Well, that's not true because. You're thinking this. Well, that's not true because. Well, that's what Paul's doing. He's throwing up some ideas that they're not supportable, and then he's just going to chop the legs out from underneath of them. Okay? Because we have been unfaithful, God shows his it shows God's righteousness. Well, if God is righteous, then he won't be angry, because that's showing that he's unrighteous, right? No, Paul says. Not true. If he were unrighteous, he wouldn't be able to judge the world. And we know he's going to judge the world. Paul doesn't refer to Psalms, but he may have been thinking about Psalms chapter 96. And I'm going to read it, and I think you'll see that he probably was. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Yes, the world is established. It shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Let the heavens be glad. Let the earth rejoice. Let the seas roar and all that filled it. Let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall all the trees of the forest sing with joy before the Lord, for he comes. For he comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples in his faithfulness. Okay then, well, because we've been unfaithful, we have glorified God, right? That's what you said. So there is no reason we should be condemned. I've helped God achieve his purposes. I could help him further by continuing to just do those evil things. Paul says, people have condemned me for saying exactly that. And they have every right to condemn me if I'd said that. That's what he says. And that's basically a restatement of all of that, the words there. That's the message Paul's making. He said, no, come on, folks. Let me chop these out from underneath of you. What then? Are we Jews any better off? Not at all. For you have already charged that all, both Jews and Greek, are under sin, as it is written. And now he's going to go through a series of Psalms. None is righteous, no, not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. That comes from Psalms chapter 14, verses 1 through 3. See, God looks from heaven and he sees that universally mankind is evil. Universally. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Psalm chapter 53, verse 1 through 3. God looks from heaven and again sees that universally mankind is evil. Their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive. Psalms chapter 5, verse 9. David is frustrated himself by the evil of mankind all about him. The venom of asps is under their lips. And the snake up there is non-poisonous, by the way. Psalms chapter 140, verse 3. David, in his fear of those who are evil about him. Right? So David is concerned about that. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Psalm chapter 10, verse 7. David laments the wickedness of mankind. Their feet are swift to shed blood. In their paths are ruin and misery, and the way of peace they have not known. Isaiah chapter 59, verse 7 through 8. And this was an accusation specifically at the Jews by Isaiah. in Isaiah. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Psalms chapter 36, verse 1. Fear, referring to the wicked, there is no fear of God. So Paul uses all of these verses he's just quoting from Psalms and Isaiah, the very things that he's pointing out, that mankind is ubiquitously evil. They're focused on themselves. There you have it. There's no advantage in terms of our closeness to God to be a Jew. That was a radical statement. That was absolutely radical. Paul establishes it by pointing out that we're all wicked, we've all forsaken God, and his quotations cover all mankind as well as historically Jewish people. And they recognized that he was talking about them. Right? All right, let's move a little faster. Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth shall be stopped, and that the whole world may be accountable to God. For by works of the law no human being will be justified in his sight, since through the law comes the knowledge of sin. With these few words, Paul piled on that Jews have no advantage before God in deterring his wrath over our unrighteousness. You Jews, you know the law. You know that you cannot uphold the law perfectly. You fail. You know that anyone who tries will fail. If you were to say otherwise, the law itself would condemn you. In a world where we're taught to take pride in ourselves and take care of ourselves, how does what we have learned so far in Romans show something different? Yeah. I don't think we even have to answer that question. We know. We know. How does that difference improve our relationship with God, our relation with ourselves, and our relationship with others? I'm going to leave that question with you. I think you kind of, if you just have listened to the lesson, it's kind of internalized, I hope. The message changes us. Right? This is that transformational aspect of Romans. God is righteous. His ways are righteous. God is just. God is fair. God is faithful. Mankind is a mess. We are rebellious. We're unfaithful. We aren't just. Rather, we try to justify our actions. We aren't good. But most of us desire to look good, and if not good, better than you. We must admit to Him and rely on God's righteousness, His mercy, His love. We must uphold Him as righteous. We must uphold Him as fair. We must uphold Him as just. We must recognize that God's perfection puts mankind at risk of God's wrath, which He's demonstrated throughout history. You see, Paul has now set his readers up, and hopefully I've set you up for the good news that he's going to preach. Right? God's going to be angry at our unrighteousness. But God's also got a plan to cover our unrighteousness. Right? And that's the message that Paul's transitioning into. So, if you've been listening to Romans and you say, well, this is the last class, I'm done, well, you're going to miss the best part, all right? You're going to miss the best part. So, let's do a quick summary. God's wrath is real. God's existence has been made evident. We are without excuse. Mankind tends to focus on God's creation rather than Him. This leads to all kinds of self-centeredness, including self-righteous judgment. This leads to chaos for all. God must be our focus, and God will judge and do so fairly. Okay? That's the message that we've covered so far. And stay tuned. Stay tuned for the good news. All right. Thanks a lot.